Yeah, okay. Well, you know what? Another movie we've both watched actually recently
Mm-hmm.
was the Shazam movie by DC.
Shazam.
Now, I think a lot
Oh,
of
Captain
people kind of
Marvel. Ha 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 ha.
yeah, Captain Marvel or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I think th this film kind of came out like, around about the same time. Again, it's a DC movie, like it's kind of contentious like, oh, is it going to do well? Is it going to do bad? Um I really like this film. I think it's been a long time since we've had a really like almost like kind of like a happy-go-lucky film. Like it is like the main point isn't to kind of deal with like darkness and stuff. It's more like, hey, it's like it's about it kind of reminds me of like this kind of like I think there's a big comparison to Big, right?
All right, and I think there's a little small nod to Big in that film.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And it's like there's Big in and of itself was one of those movies that just had a concept and it just rode the concept and kind of dealt with the issues of like a kid like suddenly being an adult and kind of dealing with the ramifications. And it was just like a very fun film, and I think that's what this film was. Like it has its serious points, like the beginning of this film. Like again, I don't actually have a big background with Shazam. Like I've read some comics, I've read comics with him in it, and I know like the origin of his character, with the wizard Shazam. But I didn't know anything about like his villains other than Black Adam. Like I've never heard of Sivana at all. Um, and but I like at the beginning of this film, they kind of like deal with, oh, okay, so the wizard Shazam, he's like constantly kind of dragging people in from reality to test whether they're worthy to have his power to protect the world from the seven deadly sins.
Yeah, I like
But
it's a good
subsequently,
concept. I love it. Yeah.
yeah, because like the way I saw it, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, like the wizard kind of just one day picks a person, and they happen to be the correct person. This movie kind of sets it up to be like almost like the wizard was being irresponsible with his power almost because maybe it's like due to his age, due to his like kind of desperation because he's losing all his power to keep the seven deadly sins in check. Um, he's kind of had people have in psychology, I forget what it's called. But I think that's what they refer to it in the actual movie itself. It's like shared mass hysteria where people remember or experience like the same thing despite it not actually happening.
Mm.
And they use this as a basis to study this technique to try and get back and find the wizard Shazam. Now, from my understanding, the Savannah character is kind of so Captain Marvel slash Shazam was a character that wasn't originally um, owned by DC Comics. His character was actually the character which is sorry, the comic book company which I'm not remembering actually tried to sue DC in saying that the Superman character actually was stolen from their Shazam character, and they actually lost that particular court case. And then several years later, when that comic book company went bankrupt, DC kind of swooped in and bought the character, kind of like a big, corporate fuck you, right?
It
Like,
was it Valiant Comics or something like that, or is that another company?
uh,
Because
I
I know
think it's
Valiant
another
Comics
company.
used to exist. And I remember that
No,
was a thing, but I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I don't think it is. So yeah, Wiz Comics is like oh no, here we go. So Fawcett Comics
Gotcha.
was the original publisher for Shazam, and I think they did buy like a bunch of other kind of characters, if I'm not mistaken. They could have like maybe bought a couple of characters to use for like Watchmen and stuff like that. But don't uh hold me to that. But yeah, uh so yeah, so it's interesting to see. And so the Sivana character in the original Shazam comic was more like a Lex Luthor type, right? He like used his like he was like really smart and he would use his tech to fight Shazam. Whereas in this movie, they made him out to be this kind of child who was like, like basically went through a traumatic event, had his father mangled, had his but probably his whole childhood like ruined because of the wizard. So it kind of gave you like a pretty like it's one of those like sympathetic villains. Like he's an asshole and he's not a good person, but you can kind of understand why he got to that point, right? Another character I'd compare it to is like the main villain in Ant, Killmonger, very similar kind of thing. And yeah, you also kind of see he kind of steals this ancient like orb that releases the seven deadly sins. So my criticism of this film, and I don't know if you feel the same, the seven deadly sins, while a good concept on screen, weren't very appealing to see.
They're not
right?
really seven. Like they could have done some cool, interesting, I guess, designs with the seven deadly sin characters because they basically just look like generic monsters.
Generic monsters.
There's no
nothing
like, oh man, this one is this one, and that one's that one, and it's like, and that is true, but I don't think like. Because in the end of this whole story, you don't really see them do much with the
I think that's what I feel like is a missed opportunity for the show. Like they don't try and like like the seven deadly sins have like these powers that are unique to like the seven sins, right? Like like greed, lust, gluttony. I'm not going to name all of them because I forget, but yeah, but that being said, and I felt like the CGI for them were really bad. But it doesn't ruin the movie because they're not the biggest focus on the movie until like towards the end of the movie. But I don't know if you agreed, like because I kind of felt like they, but that's what I mean. They were the kind of quote unquote bad part of this movie. The concept was fine. How they looked was bad, and I felt like that being the only bad thing about this movie in my eyes is really good. Because the rest of this movie is really great. But the one thing I want to point out with the seven deadly sins. There's a scene in the movie where Savannah brings the seven deadly sins to his father's office, and it just kind of turns into like a horror movie.
Yeah,
right?
I'm just like because I saw it with in the cinema with there were some kids. I'm like, man, this sounds like I don't know if this is rated. This is like rated M, so it's not really a kids movie. It's not as friendly it's not still as friendly as a Marvel film, but very much it was. I felt like this film struck a good, I guess, ground of like
balance,
balance with that. But yeah, that was pretty much a scene that stood out almost. Where I
boy,
thought it was very scary.
I mean, I liked it like from a kind of from a directorial perspective because you went from kind of doing like a regular kind of hey like superhero who learns how to do things kind of perspective, and then it's like suddenly you're in a horror film and you're seeing like all these people trying to escape this boardroom like clambering to the wall, but then like you have the monsters like grabbing him and doing God knows what, like all of the things seem really scary, and like again Savannah kind of shows his kind of like how lethal he is by like kind of grabbing his brother and throwing him out of a building, right? Like from the very get-go. So
pretty like, and that's it. It's like it was kind of justified in a sense because I think they very much build the case that the dad was kind of a dick.
And abusive, and so was
and the brother as well.
Then the brother as well.
So it's good to see like it very much is ground to earth. It's not really a big major thing where it's like this and that. It was very much like the whole point of it at the start was to get revenge on his dad, and then it turned into I guess a secondary plot type of thing.
But him being manipulated by the seven deadly sins.
Yes. So we can move on basically into the character of Billy Batson slash Shazam. The kid does a fine job. I think all the kids pretty much do a fine job in their portrayal of basically being a family or a foster family. And I think like I think it's fine with their performances, but I think that the main one is obviously the Shazam, like actual Shazam character.
Zachary Levi.
And Zachary Levi does a pretty damn good job. I think so. I think like even like someone like my sister, for example, her only negative was he was quite annoying. But I can kind of get that if you don't like those types of characters where that kind of act semi silly almost, you kind of be grading to the character. But I really enjoyed the character and their portrayal and kind of having that childlike innocence in a human man's body. You know, I really enjoyed that, like, that childlike innocence almost, you know?
Yeah, I get it. Like again, I think that's the kind of basis of this movie. Like it's a coming of age story, but then also like I actually really like the thing is sometimes with a lot of kids movie or movies that have like a lot of child actors, like they can kind of either be too annoying or too like grating. I didn't feel like that for all of the characters. Like the most annoying character might be like the youngest sister, but like even she wasn't that annoying. I kind of found her character really like endearing, like just how much of how much of like a sister she wanted to be to like Billy, despite Billy kind of like shooing her away and like kind of dismissing her, especially given like he's kind of like an orphan. I kind of liked his motivation in this movie, which was he was trying to find his mum the entire time and like going around trying to search in different like counties, and he's kind of this troubled orphan who, doesn't play by the rules. And, the whole basis is like, hey, he wants to find his mom back. Like he has a mom, he lost his mom, he's trying to find out who it is. And I like that as a motivation. But then at the same time, I'm a big fan of the character Freddy, who's kind of like the disabled, like I guess like the brother. Again, this is the kind of thing I like about this movie. Like, it gives you the ability to kind of have like the whole, I guess, diverse cast of characters without actually making it feel forced, because all the characters are orphans. So it makes sense that like you have someone who's like a disabled person, one who's an African American, another person who's Chinese. Like they all kind of come together, and it makes sense because there's this camaraderie because they're all united by the fact that they're all orphans living together under their adopted parents, who of themselves are also adopted, like were adopted growing up. So it's kind of like you feel like, yeah, they have this family moment, and you see it throughout the movie when they all have, like, I think they show it in the movie, they have dinner 4 times and they all put their hands in and they're like, oh, we're going to say grace or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it very much is like, yeah, it's family values. I think that like the overall kind of theme on it very much is like family values and sticking together with your family, whether or not they actually be your blood related family or not.
Oh, speaking of that, oh my God. Oh, okay, spoilers for this movie, by the way.
Yeah.
But like essentially, Billy Batson does eventually find his mom, and she, she's like this kind of, I guess like kind of this washed up, like kind of drug addict living with like an abusive boyfriend.
The general,
Yeah, but it's just one of those things where it's like she is not excited to see Billy, so to speak.
It was pretty brutal,
and it's just crushing because like he's basically spent his entire life thinking, his mom lost him, and she kind of straight up tells him, no, it's because I was pregnant. I just had you. I kind of didn't want you in the first place, and I'm in a bad spot, so I abandoned you, right?
Yeah, I've mentioned before this. I was in the cinema with kids, and
Yeah.
there was one girl who was sitting next to me. She's like, "Why would she do that, Dad?" I'm like, "Oh my God!" Like I was like, "Man, like it was very brutal, and it's very confronting almost, where it's like that's a very mature themed thing in this film." And it was very soul crushing.
Yeah, it gets you right in the feels, I'll tell you what.
I'm like, man.
Yeah, and it's like, well, yeah, you really feel. Yeah, your family is like who you make it, who you choose to make it, and it's obviously some good messages there. Yeah, him turning into like Shazam and learning his powers alongside Freddy. The shenanigans that they have are all like, it's all really fun to see, and see how he like grows to learn how to use his powers. Like, you see there's a lot of scenes that they kind of show in all the trailers, like, him going into the bank, him like testing his powers like on videos with Freddy, like, flossing and all that kind of stuff, like it's all really interesting. I've heard some criticism about the action in this movie. And I kind of agree, but I kind of don't mind it so much because the action in this film is kind of reduced down to all right, lightning powers and punching, which is like more or less what we see throughout the whole film when he's like fighting his Savannah or like any of the seven deadly sins.
Well, that's the thing. It's like that's his power set. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
I guess it doesn't look flashy. I guess it doesn't look like flashy for this on screen. Like there's not a lot of
well, yeah.
punching back of it. Which look again, I can kind of understand. I guess like for me, it's more like a secondary thing that he gets into a fight because again, his character is very much like Superman, right? Whereas like you need to have like the reason that Superman's character is interesting in a fight is less because of the person who's also a indestructible being as he is, but more because like Superman's constantly thinking about the people around him and how he can minimize damage and prevent other people from dying, and the villains use that to their advantage or try and use that to force him to be a certain way. For example, him fighting Doomsday is an example of that when Superman does, and so his character Shazam, he doesn't know how to fight properly. He's very, when he fights Savannah, he's very much like out of his league because he doesn't know what he's doing. But there's a cool thing that happens towards the end where he kind of, the thing is, I kind of really like this because, again, as I mentioned, spoilers. He kind of distributes the power of the other wizards to his other foster foster kids. So they also have Shazam powers, and they're part of like the Shazam family, which is like the extended kind of kind of people within the family of like Shazam. So they all have like I think the same abilities, but they just have different costumes. I kind of like that's right because I knew that was a thing, but I didn't expect them to bring it up in this movie. I think very much they might have thought, oh, like this movie might not get a sequel. We might as well try and do as much as we can and show as much as we can in this film with everyone's abilities.
To kind of get a sequel.
Yeah, and maybe get a sequel. Because I kind of felt like this kind of power up was definitely a second movie thing to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like you first establish the character Shazam, and then like at some point there'll be desperation, and then it'll be like, hey, everyone else gets a power because like
exactly.
I feel like we live in that post world where like having a secret identity as a super person is pretty much like not a thing anymore. Like I remember watching Spider-Man, like the Sam Raimi one and 2, that was such a goddamn big deal, being like, oh man, you can't tell Mary Jane and all these people, and then when the big reveal happened at the end of Spider-Man 2, that was such a big reveal and it was such a good moment. But I feel like no one does that anymore. No one does that.
But I think in Spider-Man 2, it's kind of like implied that like everybody will keep his secret. Like it doesn't matter who he is, they will protect him because he basically saved everyone's life, right? It's kind of like if somebody saw Batman's real face after he saved them, like they're not going to tell everybody that Bruce Wayne is Batman. It also kind of reminds me of like the whole concept of the Bill Murray meme. I don't know if you've heard about it, like how apparently Bill Murray does random shit to random people, like steal their food because like what are people going to say? Bill Murray stole my sandwich. Like it sounds so ridiculous that people won't believe it. So that's why he does it. So I can imagine it kind of being a very similar thing. Maybe not with Spider-Man, but maybe with Batman. Right? But yeah, it was cool to see like all the characters in their kind of adult, like because as they kind of explain, as the wizard Shazam explains. Oh, by the way, the original wizard in the Shazam comics was like a white dude. Like a white wizard guy, but like in this movie, like here's the thing: a lot of the DC films are based on the New 52, and the character is like they have like this like a black guy plays character, and the thing is, this character the iteration that's seen in the New 52 is revealed to be like a god who was on the council, much like the wizards who are on the council during one of the big story arcs in New 52, which was Pandora. I forget what it's called, like Pandora Paradox or something like. And essentially, like it's revealed that like he's actually the god. He's like the the Aboriginal god of lightning, and that's the reason why like he's got lightning powers. Like it makes sense as a, and it's also like actual Aboriginal like kind of lore behind it in
Yeah.
terms of the character that he represents. So I thought it was like a really interesting way to have that character and have it in there, but it kind of really doesn't make sense with because there were other wizards that had different identities in the New 52 reboot, but then in this movie it's like, oh, by the way, all the other wizards same power. So it's just like what's going on? And also like how does he give the speed of Mercury and courage of Achilles and all that kind of stuff? Like it's all kind of like random, but I mean
But yeah,
I
they
don't
didn't
care.
they didn't explain the power set that well, aside from like the whole
Yeah,
training
yeah.
videos.
But
But the whole like heritage
it
of
doesn't matter.
Shazam and like passing it on to generation. I feel like people got the idea of that, but
Yeah.
like it's one of those things where it's like I kind of wanted to know more about this like council and like
Exactly.
why
Yeah.
they kept the seven deadly sins like locked up, like the
Well,
history behind that.
they did explain why the seven deadly sins existed, and I'll kind of link this onto some future, sequel potential. Essentially, the council had originally had their powers given to, or at least one of their powers given to, a champion of old, who is essentially supposed to be Black Adam. And Black Adam ended up releasing the seven deadly sins, and as a result of the release of these seven deadly sins, like six of the seven members of the council ended up dying. And they kind of briefly show it. You also see like the hologram of what this previous champion looked like, and it kind of looks like Dwayne the Rock Johnson, but because that hasn't been officially signed down because of the whole
But
issue
that's the
with like
thing.
Henry
He
Cavill in
did
that.
a thank you video for like making Shazam a hit. I'm like, are you still doing this?
Yeah, it's so confusing, right? But yeah, it's very much like, Black Adam is the one who released the Seven Deadly Sins. But the other thing to keep in mind is when Billy Batson gives his other orphan siblings the powers of the other wizards, there's a total of six other, like including Billy, there's six Shazam family members, and the seventh one is Black Adam. He has the seventh wizard power. That's why they wouldn't be able to give any more of the wizard power to anyone else, because he has the last like amount of it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of found that like a pretty interesting observation, that there's some consistency that they put with all that, although it's not that big of a deal. But
Yeah,
it's cool
that's the
to
thing.
see.
We don't know where like Black Adam even really puts place, or like if he's in Shazam 2 at the current moment, or like even people are still speculating, because it's actually news that we didn't touch on, but it's like Idris Elba's not even playing Deadshot anymore in Suicide Squad 2, and he's playing another character.
Another character,
and
yeah.
like everyone's
I think
like
Bronze Tiger, maybe.
Bronze Tiger, or it could be like a Green Lantern. Everyone wants him to be a Jon Stewart type, but like,
well, people want him to be. I don't think they'll put Jon Stewart.
Yeah, but like the whole thing is like people still had that whole plan of like maybe Black Adam is still a part of Suicide Squad 2, but I have no idea if they're gonna do that.
Well, I mean, I mentioned on a podcast before, like what is it? The Dwayne the Rock Johnson, his manager is his ex-wife, and his ex-wife is also the manager of Henry. So I'm fairly certain one of the big things that's kind of happening around DC, and maybe one of the things that I've kind of read around might have been the issue is, they kind of overplayed their hand in like, oh, we want Henry Cavill to get a raise or something like that. But I think, Henry Cavill's like track record, like as a movie, like
box
like
office draw.
Yeah, draw is kind of like not justified. And this is given from the fact, like coming from the fact that I actually really like Henry Cavill.
Yeah,
And
Man
the
from
movies he's been in.
Uncle,
Man from Uncle,
Mission
Man
Impossible
of Steel.
5, like...
Yeah, Mission Impossible 5. Yeah, I love him in all those roles. Like, yeah, I can kind of understand, like, DC being like, no, you don't have that. And then being like, yeah, nah, we'll just replace you with someone else. But then obviously, the manager kind of hit them with, well, if you're not going to put Henry Cavill in, you're not going to get The Rock. you know. And I
Well,
think
that
this
well
is
that
the
leads
reason
us to
why.
the I guess like the end credit thing per se, and
Yeah,
that, by the way, spoilers, for like 3 minutes or so, is that yeah, like Henry Cavill doesn't show up, but Superman does. I don't know if that was
yeah.
done
You
by
see,
comedic
you do
effect.
see. Yeah, you do see the bottom half of well, you see, yeah, the body of Superman, which I kind of found funny because I'm like, yeah, they obviously did that because they couldn't put Henry Cavill in or whoever, which I found really funny, really, really funny.
But I don't know. Does that mean he's Superman? This still it doesn't
No,
answer the
no,
question
no,
here.
no, it doesn't. It doesn't because they didn't put his face.
Because
That's the whole reason.
like the body looks
They
about the
did,
same, but you could have got
yeah, but
easily a
that,
model for
yeah, yeah,
that.
but that,
Like,
yeah, but that's fine. The body can be whoever, but like the whole reason why, look, the same reason why they didn't, because because pretty much the same thing when the wizard was showing the who the previous champion was for the wizards. The reason why they didn't show a face is because, and they put this like generic kind of oval shape is because again did not want to put the Rock's face in when they weren't going to necessarily have him play the role because of all the shenanigans that's happening. And it's the same thing that they did at the end credits. He's not Superman yet.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And whether he is going to be based on, I don't know, whatever's happening, or I don't know if that's dead in the water. But yeah, he's definitely not Superman. They just reused the suit. I also want to point out that throughout this movie, there's obviously, you had Freddy, he was like kind of like a superhero expert, but like throughout the whole movie, there's a lot of kind of native product placement, which usually I don't like sneaky product placement, but given that it's like a DC movie and it's like you have all these toys and references to like Aquaman and Wonder Woman and Batman, it makes a lot of sense in the universe that
Yeah.
there are toys of these characters.
Well, that's the whole thing. It's like
And I really liked how, yeah, it makes sense that like, oh, like during Christmas there's the toy section that just filled and filled of like DC stuff because these are like basically real world gods almost,
yeah, there would be hair like that because like yeah, he's got the shirts, he's got the merchandise.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool, and even then it's something that they kind of sort of touch on, but it wasn't really explored fully. And it'd be kind of like it kind of the first half of this film almost where it's Shazam has his powers, but he doesn't really use it to do anything good up until like pretty much 1 hour mark almost, I think. Like, where he basically just does random stuff for money, and it's just kind of like someone being irresponsible with the powers and being like you don't deserve the power, which is kind of true. He didn't really deserve it, but it was a last ditch effort for it. But yeah, I found that very interesting and almost like yeah, I just found that interesting because it's like this someone who has a power that doesn't use their power responsible. It could lead into a thing in the future, possibly even being like, oh hey, like. You want to poach yourself to become a part of like the Justice League, for example, and like he has to probably like straighten up his act or something. Like,
Well, actually, here's the thing though. So actually towards the end of the movie, when Billy gets his hand on the object that can control the 7 deadly sins, it almost looks like it's corrupting him, and he's talking to it. But then he psychs everyone out. It's like, "Ha, you thought I was corrupted." Like that kind of shows that actually he does have a good heart. And so maybe that it wasn't so much of a last ditch effort that it maybe appeared. I think that's kind of what it kind of throws up in the air. It's like, oh, maybe he was actually the chosen champion. It's kind of like you doing like a cost benefit analysis. You're like, yeah, this guy seems like 50% or 70% good, but let's try and find like a 90%, like 90% compatibility. And then like all these people that the wizard's been trying usually isn't good enough, even though they fit that 90% compatibility. And they're like, all right, let's just take the 70% and hope he does well. Like that's kind of what it feels like. And then it turned out to be good. I kind of think that he is technically supposed to be the champion that they deserve, which kind of makes sense because obviously Billy Batson is the canon Shazam. But I think they just do it in a very good way that kind of shows that, hey, like sometimes people do, he can kind of learn from his quote unquote mistakes from like stealing and kind of doing things for selfish reasons, and he becomes less selfish and more like throughout the movie as he learns more about family and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of really positive messages in this film. There's a lot of interesting. I like the action in this film. Again, it's all very incremental, and there's a lot of comedy in it in between. It's shot very well. I like the CGI aside from all the Seven Deadly Sin stuff. I like Mark Strong as Savannah. Zachary Levi is obviously great as Shazam. The kids are great. A lot of this movie is just done really well. And look, if they do like another Shazam, cool. If they don't, hey, that's fine. I kind of like.
I think they I think they announced they're gonna do like a sequel of sorts, which
okay.
Yeah, which leads me into like the post credit scene almost, where I'm usually pretty good with this stuff and I kind of understand where things are going. I have no idea what the reference is for Shazam and the end credit scene. So
I've seen this character before. So it basically that little
insect,
insect that was in the glass at the beginning of the movie. The character's name is called Mr. Mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, it's like a psychic mind controlling bug. That's literally it.
Who's the main villain of that character, or is it just kind of like a general DC?
Yeah. No, he's like he's a Shazam villain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this was like from the Fawcett comic era. That's how. Yeah. Much like Savannah, I think most of Shazam's villains that you'll see will be Shazam specific villains. Like I believe Black Adam was also a Fawcett comic villain originally as well, up until DC obviously acquired it. And I think DC's obviously used Black Adam the most as a villain, because again, some of the other villains, as I mentioned, Savannah is kind of Lex Luthor, right? So that's why they're probably let's not use that character, bold, white scientist guy, kind of same guy. Why don't we just use Lex Luthor? Oh well, why don't we just use Superman at that stage for this story? Whereas Black Adam is it's a classic kind of light side, dark side kind of thing. And even even when you type something like Black Adam, it's kind of crazy. He was the 16th greatest comic book villain of all time at one stage. So DC's definitely done a lot more interesting stuff with Black Adam than some of the other characters. So I look forward to kind of seeing what DC maybe does with his character, and seeing whether it does really well with Billy Batson as this comedic
foil
teenager, right?
Well, not only that, but it's the whole family now, because even the
the whole family now.
Yeah, because it's they're pretty much all, because it's comedic being kids in human normal adult human bodies acting like kids. I feel even the after all they cast I forgot his name, but the main guy from the OC, one of the main guys from the OC, you don't cast that dude to be I think they cast him and he's gonna be somewhat around as an actual sidekick, and then the others will come in and out, I feel in whatever DC project they cook up next, because once again DC is just doing whatever they want to do at the current moment, and
yeah.
And I always think hey, San Diego Comic-Con's gonna happen and they're gonna tell us their big plan, but they never do it. So
yeah, and I mean, what more can you really for in that regards? I think DC's kind of put themselves in a bit of a corner, but I think the last 3 movies that they've released have all been hits. I think they've all kind of gone positive in the IMDb and the Rotten Tomatoes. Again, if you kind of compare some of the newer movies to something like Shazam, okay, so there's obviously been the joke of haha, Shazam is the real Captain Marvel, haha, which it's which is technically true, but it's kind of DC's fault for kind of dropping the ball and not protecting the rights for that character's name. Personally, I kind of like the name Shazam over Captain Marvel. I think it makes a lot more sense, although it probably makes it would probably make it very difficult for him to say his name. It's oh, I'm Shazam, and he's boy again, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at it, the tomato meter from the critic score for Captain Marvel's Captain Marvel, which is obviously a bit of a mouthful, is 78%, while Shazam has a critic score of 90%.
Mm.
And the audience review for Captain Marvel is 58%, whereas the Shazam review is 88
Yeah.
For the audience score.
Even when I walked out of Shazam, I remember hearing two guys talking, and it's like, yeah, that was way better than Captain Marvel. Like, it was way more interesting. I'm like, just even hearing that in just by like I would assume just normie type people. I'm just like, okay, I feel like that's
The general public. Yeah,
the general public feels that particular way, and it's like pretty much is like I feel like Shazam overall is a good rounded film. It doesn't do anything unique or special when it comes to certain aspects. Like it's shot like a normal type film. Like I'm one of those people who does like Zack Snyder's work, just because he does do different creative stuff, whether it be the color palette or the visuals that he puts in, or even his fight scenes. Like, even if like as you mentioned before about the Shazam's fight scenes aren't that great, it's like you could have got someone like a second unit and being like like Zack Snyder doing the action for it. It would have been very, very different almost. It just depends on the different style of who's creating the film. And I feel like overall Shazam is just a solid film,
I think so too. I think with the whole fight thing, it's like, again, it's one thing that I can agree with, but I can kind of let go because part of the issue or part of the thing with Shazam is less about the powers and more about like him kind of figuring out the powers and him growing up. And that's more important than like which villain he's fighting. I think the next film will be more important in what kind of villain fights we see, if that makes sense. Because again, like that's going to be maybe Black Adam teams up with Mr. Mind and like team up and do some shenanigans. It's going to be two villains having to team up to fight him. That seems like far more likely as a future possibility for the film going forward. But yeah, like you mentioned, great film. Highly recommend Captain Adam. Captain Adam.
Captain Adam.
You're
confusing everyone here.
I'm confusing myself. Captain Marvel / Shazam. In cinemas now.
In cinemas now. But yeah, that will be us for this week. Remember, you can always listen to us on Stitcher, Libsyn, iTunes, on YouTube, on our YouTube channel called Marketing Movies. So until next time, possibly Henry Cavill is our Superman, but we still don't know. So probably until next time, yeah. All right, who knows? So yeah, see you guys.
Catch ya.